So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay into something a little bit different. It's not really going to be a traditional siege battle today in the way that we would normally understand it, because this is going to be happening within a settlement of sorts, but it's going to be pretty much evenly contested, and we are going to be seeing an elven civil war today. And that's going to be between the High Elves and the Sylvan Elves. So we've got Lothlorien and Mirkwood on one side in the red, and we have got Imladris and Lindon in the blue on the other. So again, a bit of a kinslaying sort of situation here. And when it comes to the Elves, I mean, it's an interesting one because it means that their weaknesses aren't so easily exploited by one another, but they can't really leverage their strengths in the same way that they can against the other factions either, because the sort of lower numbers but higher quality approach is something that all of the factions today will be indulging in. But one thing that would be different between the two sides is Lorien and Mirkwood are far more similar to one another in the sense that they both prioritise archer dominance and having maybe a little bit more in terms of melee savagery from Lothlorien, and then Mirkwood of course have got a lot of high damage units as well, whereas Lindon have got obviously a lot of melee defense but not a lot of armor, and Imladris of course do have the armor and are the most defensively adept of all of the elves. So it's whether or not that mixed approach from the High Elves is going to be enough to see them over the line here, or whether or not the more joined up thinking of the Sylvan Elves is going to be enough here. And just having a look around this map overall, you can see that both sides are going to have relatively even chances of getting into position. I mean, it's going to be a relatively quick fight as well. It's more of a pitch battle than anything else really, albeit with more narrow points to contest as well. Varying terrain, but whoever can take up the best positions in terms of the terrain should go on to have the best chance in this one, because that's where the elves tend to thrive regardless of which one of the four factions we are talking about. So plenty of attacking lanes to go down, but we'll go through the High Elves first and foremost. It's not really attackers and defenders in this sort of situation. Probably be the first battle I label as a pitch in quite a long time, this one. But the Womb Raider, who made this map in conjunction with the usual suspects that have been making quite a few of the maps actually that we've shown on the channel of late. Swords of Rivendell with the armor upgrade. Obviously the solidity of Imladris is going to be important here, because again, like in terms of melee defense and in terms of the overall quality, they're not going to be able to bully their opposition in quite the same way that they might be used to. So falling back on the armor that they can apply even with their entry level units having the upgrade here should be enough to give them a little bit of an edge when it comes to surviving the arrow fire that's going to be coming their way, but also establishing a bit of dominance in melee. Certainly that will be the case when it comes to their Elder Enway. When it comes to the higher end units that they can field, the individual quality of Imladris is a little bit higher than their elven cousins, albeit units like the Elder Enway Spearmen are noticeably more expensive than the equivalents like the Hiriak or the Galathrim Spearmen that they will be facing against today. So that is worth bearing in mind. You do pay for the extra quality that you do get with Imladris, so you do have to be careful. Got the God Heliman in amongst here as well, who are shielded among the Silverthorn projectile units. They're the only ones that do come with a shield, but really when it comes to trading back and forth with these guys, whoever gets the first shot is going to be really having the better end of that engagement, because a Silverthorn arrow unit that hits an enemy archer tends to send them flying, and very, very difficult to respond when that is happening to your units. Backed up with the Norotino Warriors, again, a little bit of Imladris' melee focus poking through here, because even on their lowest tier of archers, they've got a little bit more of a melee focus to them with their dual-wielding axes in melee. Obviously, they're still very, very competent at long range, but you would probably give the edge to the red team when it comes to being able to dictate the ranged fight with the extra damage they can do, and also not so much with Imladris, but when we get onto Lindon's army, we will see a little bit of a vulnerability to enemy archers there, so it'll be interesting to see how the two sides approach this one. Elder Enway Swordmasters, again, the same thing applies here when it comes to comparing them with the Galathrim Swordsman or the Hiri Lang, for example. They are more expensive, they are better, but they are more expensive, so that is going to be the trade-off there. The Ballista, I have a feeling we're going to be seeing a fair amount of this on display today. Obviously it's the only artillery piece available to the elves, but any sort of hit you get with this unit is pretty telling when you consider the quality that's going to be on display. Could see a bit of artillery back and forth as well. Gwaithir Myrdain, the armor piercing is not going to be quite so important against their opposition today, but they are still the strongest unit of elven bodyguard infantry that Imladris can field, so it makes sense to bring them when you consider what the opposition is going to be. Gwaithir Rockdor, probably the most well-rounded, or definitely the most well-rounded unit of cavalry that the elves can field overall. Obviously Mirkwood and Lindon both have an equivalent unit to this, but they do lack the armour and the all-round survivability of the Gwythy Rockdor, so maybe this is an area where Imladris can assert some dominance. We've also got the Spears of Rivendell as well as the Imladris sentries back here, just a single unit of the pikes by the looks of things, but there is ample opportunity to get into a more narrow engagement, and the Imladris sentries normally would be very dominant in that sort of engagement, and they will be against Mirkwood, but obviously Lothlorien do have their own pike and it's even stronger, so we'll see how that goes. And then Eldarenway archers, once again, only a single unit of these guys. Again, that's probably going to be because of the added cost of Eldarenway units overall. Now then, moving on to the middle, the first of the Lindon armies under Hidden's command, a little bit more cavalry here. So we do have some Harlindon riders, so horse archers. I mean, normally they can be zoned out by foot archers, so that is going to be a worry for them, but all things considered, when it comes to avoiding enemy cavalry, they're not going to have too much in terms of numbers to have to try and dodge. I mean, we'll see. It's going to be difficult to use the Harlindon riders, I think, but there is a possibility of them being very effective indeed. Mithlond Lancers, obviously Javelin Cavalry, they've got those lances when it comes to being out of ammunition as well, so possibility of getting some good charges, but again, I think the difficulty of using the Lindon Cavalry is going to be quite high, but the rewards are also potentially pretty great as well. Unsurprising to see another Ballista for exactly the same reasons that we mentioned with Imladris. Looks like a more numerous army this. We do have the Horse Lords of Ulmo, the Lindon Knights. I mean, they're also incredibly damaging and also very good in melee. But they do, of course, lack the armour and shields of the Gwythy Rockdor, so they do lack a little bit of survivability, but still just as scary in many ways. Noldorin Blade Masters, the strongest unit of Lindon Bodyguard. On this occasion, you would probably say, well, you would definitely say, I think that they're going to be the better pick in comparison to the Gwythy Rockdor, because they don't need the armour piercing. The base damage is going to be more useful, as well as the extra survivability from being a two-handed swordsman. Got Mithlond Swordmasters as well, so obviously Lindon across the board are going to struggle when it comes to their armour values. I know the Harlindon infantry here do have that shield, but still, when it comes to, they really don't want to be caught out in the open against Lothlorien or Mirkwood's archers for too long, otherwise they're going to be in real trouble, as Lindon often are against archer heavy forces. But if they do get into melee pretty quickly, they've got stuff like Mithlond Marines and they've got Mithlond Pikemen, they've got all of those heavy swordsmen we just mentioned, as well as having some Noldorin Guard and Noldorin Blade Masters as well. Of course, Lindon do bring their own archers, you do need to still contest that sort of thing, and if they can get into a position where they're not getting shot in return, stuff like the Lindar Mariners and Lindar Bowmen are still going to be very effective against forces, especially Mirkwood, because Mirkwood kind of share the same weakness as Lindon to enemy archers if they're caught in the open, just not quite as extreme perhaps as the elves of the far west. The next Lindon army is going to be Ding Da King. He has got another unit of the Horse Lords of Ulmo, unsurprisingly, as well as the Noldorin Blade Masters. Again, a little bit of a risk here that Lindon are taking by bringing so many mounted units, but perhaps bringing all of the infantry. They knew they would get caught by the enemy archers too much, so going for the riskier approach could prove to be worthwhile. Mithlond Nobles on the chariots, obviously the javelins are nice, the chariots, they can be a real mixed bag, they can be a real nightmare to deal with, especially for low mass factions like the elves, but again, if they get caught up for any length of time, they're going to get burnt down very quickly. We also have one unit of Harlindon, or two units of Harlindon riders here actually, so they're going to be joining the chariots as well as Lindar Bowmen in support of the main army. Interesting to see two units of the horse archers, no javelin cavalry, but again joining up with Hidden here in the middle. They should be able to sweep forward pretty quickly and contest the mid ground over there. That high ground is something that the red team will be eyeing up very nicely. We've got the Mithlond Swordmasters here in numbers, we've got the Ballista, Mithlond Marines, so again the Javelins, another unit of artillery. I think we're going to see the Ballista be pretty impactful one way or another for all of the forces on display today. Harlindon infantry here in numbers as well. And finally, going down this narrow junction, we have the second Imladris force under Medexa's command, all in one big blob. So yeah, Eldarenway Swordmasters are here once more in this sort of environment. I mean, it's a long, narrow path, but if they can get into melee, of course, that's where they want to be. Plenty of Eldarenway Spearmen. We've got the Gwythy Arthand as well, so the more defensive bodyguard unit. Very tough to kill, of course, albeit the last time we saw them, they did get wiped out very fast by an artillery shot. No, by the Witchers, rather. But they will not be having to deal with that sort of thing today. More Gwythy Myrdain. We've got Noratirno warriors as well. God Helim, unsurprisingly. So again, they do have that ranged presence, as well as the Spears of Rivendell here We've got the Gwythi Rock Door as well, so interesting to see what the Imladris cavalry does, whether it charges forward to get its own position or whether it meets up with the Lindon cavalry and tries to really secure the middle. At least initially, obviously as the battle wears on, chaos will start to reign, I'm sure. Yeah, Swords of Rivendell here at the back, and that's pretty much it. Swordmasters, Spears, Eldarenway Archers, so again, expensive in the way of archers, but that's just the way it is. And now for the red team, who I imagine quite a lot of their number, especially from Mirkwood, are going to be hidden. We've got Torres, who has got some upgraded Hiri Ak. I wonder actually if Imladris would prefer to face Lorien or Mirkwood. I mean, Lorien have got the armor piercing to do damage to Imladris, but also stuff like the Gwythi, Myrdain are not really going to be well suited for fighting Mirkwood, albeit the armor upgrades are here for the Hiri Ak, a very adept defensive unit, and they're going to need to be, considering they're going up against Imladris. Nice shield value on them as well to help mitigate the problems that they may have dealing with Imladris' archers. Again, upgraded Hiri Lang, which I think is probably the way to go. It just bulks out your units just that little bit more, so if you do get caught in a straight up slog against Imladris or even against Lindon with their superior melee defense, this can make the difference for you as long as you engineer the engagement correctly. So the Hiri Lang, a lot is going to be expected of them, and remember, we can bring more of these than the Eldarenway Swordmasters on the other side, so that is also another potential bonus. And then another unit, they're all wearing the same armour of the units that we can see, the upgraded Elder Palace Guard, and they will be useful pretty universally against Imladris. Again, they've got that armour piercing, they've got the anti-cavalry bonus, really good melee defense as well. The only thing they really lack is a shield, so they'll be wanting to avoid getting into the sights of something like the God Halim. Rest of the units are all hidden, however, so that could be Rangers, it could be Woodland Realm standard units, javelins and all that sort of thing. We'll see how that develops. Oh no, there's more units over here actually that he has brought. So the cavalry is going to be in the middle, and they're going to be potentially facing off against Lindon very quickly, albeit the Mirkwood Border Guard are very, very similar in terms of their weaknesses to the Harlanden Riders. So we'll see how that goes. We've also got the Elven King's Huntsman, a more aggressive unit of cavalry. Again, charges from Lance cavalry in this situation can rack up value very, very quickly given the smaller nature of these armies. And the Elder Pathfinders are the bodyguard tier. Mirkwood cavalry, not quite as tanky as the Imladris variant. Kind of similar in many ways actually to what Lindon have, albeit I think the Elder Pathfinders technically count as spear calves still. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. I mean, it's going to be an interesting back and forth between the two anyway. Soccer Enjoyer, the first of the Lothlorien armies. We've got a couple of units of the Galathrim Spearmen, again we mentioned with the Hiri Ak, but you can bring more of these guys than the equivalent Eldarenway, and Lindon don't have these heavier units in general until you get up to the Noldorin units, of which there are no spears, so that is something to consider. Galathrim Riders, a unit of horse archers with Silverthorn arrows. I mean, this could be key because none of the other Elven factions have got an equivalent to this. They're very damaging, very difficult to deal with, and again they can kite enemy cavalry around or they can go after enemy infantry. Could be important for Lorien's chances here. Again, that's a lot of cavalry, a lot of expensive cavalry as well with the standard Lorien cav. So yeah, I think we're going to be making ample use of half speed here, which is probably why the battle is relatively short, because a lot of it is going to come down to a real flurry between the fast movers, and then the infantry will follow through, and whoever gets the best position of that I think is going to go on to win. Galathrim Nobles, more Silverthorns of course, the foot-based variant, and also very tough to deal with in melee. Galathrim Archers, we've got another ballista in there. Interesting to see actually, Torres doesn't seem to have one. The first army on the field here that doesn't. We'll see if that makes a difference. It's an expensive unit after all, you can spend it on other things. We've got standard Lorien Archers, Kindred of Celeborn and Galathrim Axemen, so of course both are very strong in melee, but both also have those very deadly throwing axes. The Kindred in particular could be a real problem in that regard, especially for Lindon. Lindon do not want to be on the end of throwing axes if they can help it. Moving on, we have got another Mirkwood army actually, so on this occasion it's Lorien, Mirkwood, whereas on the other side it's Lindon both in the middle and Imladris both on the flanks. We'll see if that comes into play. We've got Chuckles, Hiri Ak again upgraded on the front line. The solid units of Mirkwood are going to be important at trying to establish a fight in melee that isn't too much against them, because again Mirkwood's flimsier units would not do too well against the more battle-hardened Imladris troops. We've got the Elder Council here as well, so a bit of javelin support. We do have the Hiri Lan also. Again, more Elder Pathfinders. This Mirkwood force does have a ballista, so they're going to be able to help contest that very important high ground you feel in the middle, and the rest of the Mirkwood force, as always, is going to be hidden. And then finally, the last Lothlorien army under Winged Swordsman's command, we have got Galathrim Riders once again. Unsurprisingly, we mentioned how important they could be in the last Lothlorien army. We've got Galathrim Nobles, we've got Kindred of Celeborn as well, a hidden unit which could possibly be the Rangers, the Karen Amroth Rangers. We've got Galathrim Archers, so again, big ranged presence, but that's not too surprising, because I think that's where the Sylvan Elves certainly hold the edge over the High Elves. More Galathrim Spearmen and Lorien Spearmen as well, just to help bulk out the front line. More hidden units, which is interesting. Could be the the Mirkwood, the Assassins are a Mirkwood unit, aren't they? But still, we've also got Galathrim Axemen over here as well, so more throwing axes in decent numbers as well. Obviously Imladris are across the way, and even though throwing axes are not armor piercing, they will still be very, very handy at helping to deal extra damage to their High Elven counterparts here. So considering the length of the battle, and considering I would imagine the cavalry is going to fan forwards from both sides very, very quickly, there's not really much need for a cut on this occasion. So I think what we will do is simply move over to Lindon's forces over here, and we'll get the show on the road with what I imagine is going to be the cavalry scattering across the field. Of course, another factor as well, not only is the High Elven team on this occasion got the most variation between their armies, but also one thing that's going to be very important in a more wide open battle like this surely is going to be the cavalry. And the more varied cavalry is certainly for the blue team here, with a combination of horse archers, javelin cavalry, chariots, heavy cavalry. They've got everything they really need in terms of situations, whereas the red team over here have got a far narrower swath, really, of light lancers and horse archers, albeit their horse archers are far more numerous and probably more devastating, considering Lindon are going to be the ones trading back and forth with them, and they're not really the best at doing such things. Although, having said that, neither are Mirkwood, if we're being honest, especially with their horse archers being relatively lightweight. But understandably, this central ground with the high position is going to be something which both teams want. It's more so to prevent the red team from acquiring it, I think, for the blue team, purely because of the extreme danger that the skirmishers pose. Galathrim Riders firing away as the Gwythi Rockdoor retreat just in behind. And it's going to be here in the middle where things get underway first and foremost, surely. Javelins going about their work. Are they going to charge in? They are. Still with the javelins going back and forth though. Woodland Realm Patrol and Mirkwood Rangers, so taking a decent amount of damage there. I think we will go down to half speed already, to be honest, because things are going to start getting pretty hectic pretty quickly. Interesting that the archers were leading the way, but then again, if you can get some direct shots onto the Lindon cavalry, then they are going to be in danger, and you can see that they were wavering for a short while there. Don't want to be lingering too long when the heavier Mirkwood spears are lurking around the place. Meanwhile, Gwythi Rockdoor just in behind, going to be trying to zone out the Galathrim Riders of Winged Swordsmen here, using their own foot archers, the Norreturner warriors on both sides. Of course, as an individual unit, the Galathrim Riders are far superior, but the number of arrows that are going to be coming their way means that they don't want to stick around here for too long, really. Again, fanning further forwards. We do have the blue team trying to secure as much map position as they can early on, try and take the choice spots so that the Mirkwood Elves and the Lothlorien Elves can't get situated too comfortably. Yeah, there's a nice position for the God Helim over there that they have already taken up. No equivalent on the other side. Oh, actually, no, there is. Potentially go up there if they wanted to, but again, attacking into the Sylvan Elves is probably not going to be big on the list of priorities if they're in a dug-in position. Engineering the correct engagement is going to be absolutely vital here, as the cavalry continues to sweep forwards. See over the distance there, meanwhile, navigating the canyons. We do have the Hiriak, who are going to contest the top here. The cavalry buying enough time, however, for the Lindon infantry to arrive, and that's going to be a concern. Those Mython Swordmasters should do pretty well. I mean, the Hiriak are solid, so they won't go down easily, of course, but over the long haul, surely the Lindon damage, combined with that very high melee defense, is probably going to be enough to wear down what Mirkwood can get up here. But they have established a beachhead, so they should be able to get some support in there. Mirkwood Border Guard are firing away. And we've got the Lothlorien Lancers threatening to go around the side, so it is just, again, pressurising each flank. Lindar Bowman, I mean, if Lindon can get better value with their archers than Mirkwood can in this sort of engagement, it's a sign that Lindon really are onto a good thing, but obviously they're going to be engaged in melee as quickly as possible, and then Harlindon infantry going to move in to try and bail them out. But again, just one unit of Hiriak is not going to be enough in this situation. They do need to get more support up here quickly. To wait and see where that develops. Meanwhile, on this flank, a more heavy-duty engagement as the Galathrim Spearmen are being sent forward, and this is an area where the armour piercing of the Gwaithir Myrdain will come in pretty handy. Victory almost a certainty for Imladris over here. So I think the more aggressive push has been from the High Elves, but also the most cohesive use of the units so far has been from the High Elves. But it's very early doors, but this is the sort of thing which can snowball in these battles. But trading back and forth here, Norotino Warriors and Galathrim Archers, that's going to be a fairly simplistic victory for the Galathrim Archers. Again, this flank is probably not going to appreciate the fact that Lindon are also sending some cavalry over here, so not really any openings against Mirkwood with all of their banked up archers in the middle. Plenty of opportunity to support one another. Lothlorien Lancers doing a good job there. Galathrim Riders, Warriors lurking around as well. I mean, there's plenty of damaging projectiles here from Lothlorien, so I don't know how aggressive the Lindon cavalry is going to be able to be, but still, decent start. Lothlorien have committed these units to the flanks. Again, I mean, Lorien Spearmen and Galathrim Spearmen are good defensively, but when you're going up against, I mean, Eldarenway Spearmen in the numbers they're in, but the backup of the Swordmasters should definitely tilt this fight in favour of Imladris, you would suggest. So they go in again, we mentioned in the army composition phase that the Eldarenway, when you compare them to the equivalents from the other elven factions, the Galathrim and the Hiriak, do have that extra quality. Slightly lower in numbers, but again, it's going to be the swordsmen that do the business there. But Lothlorien have had the better of the central engagement, again on the back of their archers' strength. Meanwhile, in the middle, Lindon having to contest with more Mirkwood units now. That initial unit of Hiriak continues to take damage, but the situation has stabilised with additional units being sent in. The javelins have been silenced by some very aggressive Harlindon infantry, but they're not going to be stuck around for long. But Lindon are more comfortable when it comes to javelin warfare than Mirkwood. So we see the occasional javelin come across as well. With the Realm Axeman, it says victory is a distinct possibility, but I find that decidedly hard to believe when it's the Noldorin Guard that they're going up against. More javelins raining down on the approaching Mirkwood Elves, Entwives. And there's the artillery. Can it arc its shots? I mean, we mentioned pretty much universally the ballistae should be effective for all sides. Of course, it was over here, it was this Mirkwood army of Torres that didn't have a ballista. With that in mind, beginning to, well, I'm willing to bet that Torres probably wishes he did have a ballista now, because these narrow sightlines probably suit artillery-based warfare quite nicely. Swords of Rivendell on the way forward, immediately being targeted by a couple of units of Mirkwood Rangers. I mean, they'll do a lot of damage, but is this the best choice of target? I mean, in a quick battle like this, it doesn't necessarily matter what quality of unit you're targeting. Sometimes you just need to do the damage. Norotino Warriors are there as well. I mean, the Mirkwood Cavalry was trading back and forth here. Harlindon Riders, got Lothlorien Cavalry, the Elven King's Huntsmen. So yeah, Torres' cavalry force, which was pretty substantial, is moving along with this Lothlorien army. I mean, I think, to be fair, this, you can understand the trepidation of moving forward because both sides have set up a good position on their respective hills, but the cavalry is not really having the most impact. It might even be worth siphoning off the cavalry to other parts of the battlefield to try and support your allies, whether that be the High Elves or the Sylvan Elves. But then is cavalry the most useful thing in this kind of environment? It's very condensed. I mean, the Entwives are going to be a real problem. these monstrous infantry units are capable of doing damage regardless of the quality of the unit they're going up against, really, and the kill counts are all that more impactful when it's elves versus elves, so our Lindon infantry could be in trouble here, as could the Lindar bowmen, neither of which are likely to do damage too quickly to the Ents. And Lindar Mariners, I mean, there's more units making their way forwards now, having seen what Lindon were capable of doing when supporting their allies. Mirkwood are attempting to do the same thing, but Lothlorien Guard are trying to make life a little bit more awkward for them. There's Lorien Spearmen that could be moved in support, Gwythi Rockdoor as well, so again the cavalry interplaying with each army a little bit more so over here. Elder Royal Council covered by the cavalry, so not the easiest thing for something like the Lothlorien Guard to chase down, and even if they did, they're probably going to take a few Silverthorn arrows to the front, which will knock them around a bit. Lorien Spears, what are they going to do? I mean, they may have to turn around in just a moment, because I don't know how successful they're going to be in this melee engagement with Imladris. Again, Lorien do have the damage to cause Imladris problems, but they do need to get the better side of an engagement, and I don't think that's necessarily true here. Being crumped in on by the Gwythi Mirdain with the Swords of Rivendell in support. I mean, they've got a bit of armour piercing of their own now with the Galathrun warriors, but again, there is a quality discrepancy between the best units on both sides here. Kindred of Celeborn taking hits from the Elder Runway archers. Artuno warriors going about their business. The God Helene. A bit more of an overview now. And again, when the God Helene are here, that does, again, just tilt the battle away from Lorien a little bit. Going after the infantry as well. Do you have Carin Amroth Rangers? Do they have the best angle? Possibly not. So again, just the little victories that Imladris are winning thus far, really helping them. Galathrun warriors being sent in to help the spears, but not only are the Elder Enway here, but an auxiliary unit of Swords of Rivendell has been sent forward, so again Imladris just turning the screw a little bit on Lothlorien over here. But now, here in the middle, Lindon rebuffing the cavalry assaults from Lothlorien. Lothlorien the ones willing to take the aggressive stance first by the looks of things, and Mirkwood Border Guard in close proximity as well. Gonna get some pretty good point-blank shots on the Harlindon riders. Again, Elven Horse Archers, with the exception of the Imladris ones and the Bodyguard Lothlorien ones, do tend to be lighter in nature, more susceptible to counter-fire like this. In come the Lorien Cav. Should be that unit of Horse Archers starting to struggle a little bit more now as well, and Lorien Cavalry getting some decent work done, again against the enemy Cav more so than the infantry at the moment, although those Lindar bowmen, when their bows are drawn, are a pretty juicy target for Lance Cavalry. Spears in melee means you have to be pretty quick on the retreat, mind you. Meanwhile, Imladris firing from their God Helene just a little bit further back. Again, the shields and the upgraded armour of the Hiriak means that they're going to be reasonably resilient, but still, are these the kind of casualties that Mirkwood can sustain over here? Got reinforcements, they've got Mirkwood Rangers doing their own damage, lots of damage to the Noratuno warriors, but it's skirmisher on skirmisher, whereas the High Elves tend to be able to do a little bit of damage to the enemy infantry as well. Lindar. Victory is almost a certainty for Mirkwood over here, so their infantry starting to press forward. Combination of the aggressive Hiri Lang and Entwives causing all sorts of problems for the Lindon Pikes, which under normal circumstances of course would be pretty good against the Mirkwood infantry, but the addition of the Entwives turns that engagement on its head really. Very potent. Harlindon Riders getting a good angle into the Woodland Realm Axemen. Of course, they're particularly vulnerable to arrow fire, relatively light armour, lack of a shield as well. What else have we got going on? Thlond Marines, ballista is up here, though. I mean, surely the ballista, if it gets a good shot, and Mirkwood, as they get more and more dominant in that engagement over there, the clearer the shot should be for the ballista crew. But of course, you can see Mirkwood invariably think the same thing, because their archers are now targeting the crew down, and the crew is fairly numerous, actually, which is a weird thing for an elven unit to be in relation to other artillery crews, but they're also very lightly armoured. So enemy archers can be a real problem for them, but surely... Of course, the real prize would potentially be getting the Ents, but I think you just have to shoot centre mass of these units just so you get some good shots off. And I mean, there's plenty of Hirilang, which are another dangerous unit for Lindon to face off against, because it's the most like-minded Mirkwood unit when you compare them to the kind of qualities that Lindon value in a melee unit such as this. Part of the battle with this situation for artillery is convincing your units to fire in, and the javelins are doing a decent amount of damage, so Mirkwood are taking some pretty significant hits, but so too have Lindon in response, and it is going to come down to that artillery doing its thing. Are they actually able to... I mean, they have got 2 of them loaded. At this point, it doesn't matter if the third one's loaded. I think you just need to shoot those bolts, and there they go. Not flaming shot, which is interesting. Again, the morale sapping capabilities, is that going to be the most important thing? But flaming shot on artillery does tend to do a little bit more damage in comparison to archers, where there's no difference in that regard. Sacrificing power for accuracy, but at this point I think power is what you want. Little Marines joining the fight, and they're pretty good as a melee unit. One army has lost half of its number, meanwhile. Damage being done by some kind of artillery, and it's actually Imladris'. Was that necessary? I mean, they just about managed to clear a decent firing lane, so I mean that's actually good work from the Wind Raider. They were doing just fine as just a straight up melee engagement, but this is only going to hasten Lothlorien's demise, surely. Victory seeming certain for them more than ever now. And the Galathrin warriors will do a bit of damage in return, but they're doing quite well over here, the High Elves. Here through the middle, not quite yet ready to try and attack over here as well. Lothlorien do have more units in reserve, including Galathrin nobles. Around here somewhere with the Kindred of Celeborn as well. Have they been moved in over here? They have, but they've been swamped. Swamped by Elder Renway. They would have been one of the first choices of target for stuff like the God Halim as well. Galathrin Riders, Karen Amroth Rangers, I mean they're going to be capable of doing a decent amount of damage. I think Imladris will go on to win over here, but it may not be quite so domineering as you would think, considering they've been on the better end of quite a few of these engagements so far. Well, here in the middle, I think there is a bit of an onus now on Lorien to try and make something happen against Lindon over here, and this is probably one of the happier hunting grounds for the Sylvan Elves so far. I think initially the engagement over here was also going the High Elves way, but the cavalry play and just having those extra Mirkwood numbers meant that it was quite a lot for Lindon to deal with in that regard, and now having to deal with enemy artillery when theirs has already been dealt with very nicely by the Lorien archers. They're going to be able to try and put the pressure on Lindon in the ways that they don't want to, with archers and with artillery, and obviously that may convince Lindon at some point to be a little bit more aggressive, but that's not necessarily the play anymore either. Might become so though if Lothlorien send more units over here to try and deal with Imladris, but you can see that Imladris have begun their melee assault over here as well, feeling as though they've softened the enemy up enough, and Mirkwood weren't ready for this because a lot of Elder Renway have pierced the lines. I say a lot, one unit of Elder Renway, or 2 units of Elder Renway Swordmasters, but if there's a unit you don't want marauding around your backline, it's going to be these guys, let's be honest. And then Mirkwood silencers, I mean they're going to be able to do a decent amount of damage with those projectiles right from the off. Quite a few of those Elder Renway Swordmasters falling by the wayside and actually turning around. They need to continue their march forward, because otherwise they're going to get hit in the back by the silencers, and that's one way that Mirkwood could clear this up pretty quickly. There's the Entwives over here as well, albeit Elder Runaway Swordmasters are going to be better than most units at dealing with monstrous infantry, but all of this is just buying time for the rest of the Imladris army to continue their march through. Hiri Lang, defeat seeming certain, having to deal with the tanky spears, the Gwythi Arthand and all of the other support. I mean, it's not often you see the elves be this aggressive and attempt mass pushes because of their more limited numbers, but of course elves v elves, that becomes less of a concern. Gwythi Myrdain as well. How serious are Lorien about committing some infantry down here? The minute they do that is the minute that Ding's Lindon army will have a little bit more of an opening to be aggressive as well, so they may need to, because I don't think Torres is going to withstand this kind of battering from the elves for too much longer. They've got the Palace Guard, they've got the Entwives, so these units in behind enemy lines from Imladris are not going to last too much longer, but the complete package is what I'd be concerned about here. They're going to need stuff like the Mirkwood silencers to do quite a bit of heavy lifting. Meanwhile, the very changeable fight that was happening in the middle, how is that going? We do have the chariots. Ding's chariots electing not to try and go after Lorien from the front. Lindon trying to prevent some support coming up from Soccer and Joya as well. The High Elves were successful in claiming this ground first, which meant the Mirkwood archers were not as devastating as they perhaps could have been. But I think the Ents, the arrival of the Ents and the Hiri Lung up here on the high ground was definitely a bit of a turning point. The Ballista now being engaged again. I think it's a similar situation here, only in favour of the Sylvan Elves as it is for Imladris over on the other side, where they're going to win, but they're going to win with not a huge amount left in the tank. Could be that both Lindon forces end up bearing the brunt, and the two Imladris armies end up victorious. Barons on the way forward, going to try and do some damage with their javelins, but immediately they're going to be the target of archers from across the way. Progress of Imladris made since the last time we saw them. Norotino warriors firing away. They are now engaging in melee over here as well. Galathra Maxman being denied the use of their throwing projectile from the off, which again could be pretty vital as this goes along. They're trying to stand and shoot, as are the Galathram archers, but if they're being nibbled at in melee, how much value are they really going to get there? Karen Amroth Rangers could be the ace in the pack though for Lothlorien. The amount of damage they can do to Imladris as they advance is still significant, even against some of the more heavily armoured units, but the Galathram warriors trying to peel themselves off the front now. Maybe it's an exercise in damage limitation for Lothlorien over here now. Victory seems certain for them. Pursuing the cavalry, trying to prevent it from getting a front or a rear charge on them. They can still get a frontal one though, and it's Gwythi Rockdoors, and that's going to be a heavy charge indeed if they elect to go that route. Swords of Rivendell. Galathram Nobles. One of the Lorien generals in the middle. Near the pit of despair in the middle here. I mean, the answer's still there. Perhaps not. I'm sure it was over here somewhere. Still had the rest of the unit as well. So Mirkwood going to maybe send some support Lorien's way. Is that going to be quick enough? I mean, they still have their artillery as well. That's another tale that has been made pretty apparent. The Sylvan Elves seem to have made better use of their artillery, which, considering they have one artillery piece less, is pretty important. But then over here, it's actually Imladris that came up to engage Lothlorien, perhaps in a preemptive measure, having to fight uphill the Elder Runway, but they won't mind too much. They're just trying to buy a bit of time, I think, to try and complete a victory over here. Swords of Rivendell. Victory almost a certainty. Again, pressure coming in from the Imladris archers as well. As much as Mirkwood have the better archers, Mirkwood are also more vulnerable to archers across the board, so does that cancel out? And over here, that combination of Ents and Palace Guard is going to be very difficult to deal with on a one-to-one basis, even the Gwythi Arthur taking damage. Gwythi Myrdain wouldn't be the worst choice though. They'd struggle against the Palace Guard still, I think, considering the unit types, but the armor piercing would certainly be useful against the Ents, especially now that they have been bloodied. Pushing on to try and deal with the Mirkwood Rangers, however. Not the worst idea. You definitely want to be trying to keep Mirkwood's missiles to a minimum. Hiri Lang, though, the ones that have been left behind in this engagement, still doing decently well. Again, another situation where Imladris have taken the initiative, but they're taking a lot of damage in doing so, and on this occasion, unlike over here, looks like they're being rebuffed. Again, the margins are always going to be fairly small when it comes to this kind of fight, I would suggest, in terms of the qualities that each faction has to work with. There goes a Mirkwood general, slammed into by the Horse Lords of Ulmo. So as they're trying to get the ballista across to give Lothlorien a bit of respite over here, they may end up paying the ultimate price for doing that. Yes, their spears in melee, but Horse Lords of Ulmo, a clattering charge, and also completely healthy. That is the thing, like, Ding has lost a few units, but everything important is still posted up on that hill, albeit they are being peppered up by the ballista, as you can see in the distance. But Mirkwood Border Guard coming across to try and act as a bit of a blocking unit. The Elder Pathfinder's also trying to chase them down as well. I think actually we will just go up to 1 speed now. Things are a little bit more... There's only really like 3.5 engagements going on at the moment. Ballista doing its thing over there, but still some Mythlon Marines online from hidden. And at this point, just another general falls, and that's a Mirkwood general, I think, or is it, no, that a Lindon general? Interesting place to put the general, but I guess one of the last units in. So hidden is going to be dealt with, but then again, more support from Lothlorien was forthcoming over here. Albeit, I think this was a... Even if without that support, I do think Mirkwood would have gone on to win this one against Lindon. Those Ents really were pretty deadly. And now the Horse Lords of Ulmo going to be a little bit easier to contain. Ooh, and a good choice of target. Fortunate there for the Wing Raider, though, only one of those bolts ended up hitting. Glathra Maximin are fleeing. The Gwythi Myrdain going to be the next choice of target. Generals falling left, right and centre. That is the Mirkwood general. Yeah, just in behind enemy lines. Still some Lorien resistance, but it is waning. In fact, that was the last of the Lorien resistance. Assistance again, the Horse Lords of Ulmo being used to support one of their allies rather than themselves. The Womb Raiders ballista has been pretty decent. But this is an opportunity for Mirkwood to actually use this high ground now, potentially. Gwythi Myrdain will want to steer clear of the Silverthorns. Ballista now potentially being wheeled over to attack Imladris. Decent amount of damage done to Lindon, but now Mythlon Marines making themselves known, sweeping across the hills with Mythlon Swordmasters. So this could be the moment where Lindon chance an engagement against Lothlorien from the front here. You can see that the ballista immediately turns around upon seeing this, but with Imladris maybe trying to contest the high ground against Mirkwood in the middle. Lindon are going to try and do the same now, but that's going to be pretty brutal. Galatharan Nobles are going to be excellent unit to disrupt a Lindon advance. Harlindon infantry going to take a fair amount of damage from that. Swordmasters, Blade Masters on the way forwards as well. Lindar Mariners going to do some point blank work. Come the Lorien Archers though, out of ammunition, but presumably getting a decent amount of value against the Lindon forces, now just being used to try and break up the Lindon advance and give a little bit more time for Lothlorien riders and nobles to go about their work. The Noldoran Blade Masters will be a problem for Lothlorien in melee, but again, that strength and depth of their skirmishers is exactly the sort of situation that Lindon normally would wish to avoid. Defeat almost a certainty. Good amount of damage coming in there from the Galathram Axeman. Yeah, and I can understand certainly why Ding has moved forward now. Now would be the moment to do so, otherwise you're just going to be waiting indefinitely. There is a case for saying maybe link up with the Wound Raider and attack the middle, try and deal with Mirkwood over there, but in so doing you're effectively hanging your ally out to dry. And what is the ultimate result of this fight over here? Yeah, just the muscle of Imladris proving too much in the end. The Ents have only got so much fight in them, as of the Palace Guard, and yeah, when it comes to that sort of violent engagement, Imladris are a little bit better suited for it than Mirkwood, at least with the compositions that we saw here. Medexa targeting them down, albeit this does mean that Torres is free to micro his cav exclusively. Mirkwood Rangers, a little bit of extra damage being done to Imladris on the retreat. Imladris now need to go to the aid of Ding, really. They do still have this unit of Elder Runway Spearmen that are pinning this unit of Lorien Spears and Archers in place. But how much time do they have? I mean, to be fair, actually, this Lindon attack, because it was more melee focused, perhaps this is the answer. The Ballista trying to do its thing, and far more successful, of course, than Ding's Ballista, but this could be the moment where all of this infantry does come good. Harlanden infantry, though, struggling on this side, so they're winning where they could potentially meet up with Imladris later, but things are a little bit less clear elsewhere. It's close still. It's not a clear advantage to one side or the other so far, I'd say. Yeah, and that Mirkwood Ballista. Imladris forces, having used up all their ammunition on Lothlorien earlier, now moving forward. Once again, having to use brute force against Mirkwood, which should be successful. Imladris are healthier than Mirkwood are after their victory over here. And also looks like they've got more in the tank in terms of ranged support. Sending the Elder Royal Council flying, a taste of their own medicine. Once again, the Sylvan Elves are going to be reliant on the Ballista to do a lot of heavy lifting. And they can scarcely afford more misses like that. Well. Further down. Continuing to move forward. So again, the fact that Winged Swordsman is the only army on the field that has been completely destroyed is maybe a bad sign. I mean, Hidden's army, I think, is mostly gone. You can see a bit of cavalry buzzing around earlier. That might have been dealt with in the interim. So we're looking at, for the most part, one army each completely destroyed. Mirkwood looking pretty weak up on that hilltop, though. Lorien consolidating. Doing their thing. God Helene, 61 of them still alive, and now you're seeing that brutality that Medexa's Imladris force showcased against Mirkwood now being brought to bear against Lorien, and Lorien probably would be able to outlast Lindon if this engagement were to go on, but with Imladris arriving, it looks like Lindon have folded for the most part, to be fair. The cavalry, yeah, those Elder Pathfinders, Chuckles, sending them down here, perhaps giving up a little bit on this high ground position. I mean, to be fair, there wasn't much to be able to defend with anyway, and yeah, Ballista Crew going to be used as auxiliary infantry later by someone. So it's, for the most part, a relatively healthy Soccer Enjoyer commanded Lorien and a relatively healthy Moon Raider Imladris, but Medexa is the sticking point here. I think in terms of fast movers, in terms of cavalry, the Sylvan Elves do still hold the advantage, but how effective is that going to be against the solidity of the Imladris force that still is on the field. Kindred of Caliborn and the Galathrim nobles are still up and alive, however, and that is a strong combination of units, and they're a little bit healthier than the equivalent Imladris ones as well, who had to be used aggressively against Torres's Mirkwood position a little earlier. And there goes an Imladris general, again trying to utilise that cavalry advantage that they do possess. Kindred leading the way. Sindar Blade Masters unupgraded, but don't necessarily need to be. They're trying to overwhelm the God Helim and surviving Eldoran way. It might just be a case of Imladris over here trying to do as much damage to Lothlorien as possible before the healthier force arrives from the other side. And I think Imladris are actually, or Lothlorien I should say, are actually dividing their attention equally, which is interesting. I mean, the Galathrim nobles were sent up here, and some Galathrim units as well, the ballista crew just being thrown in. I don't know if this was necessarily the play. I mean, sending some rearguard units potentially while you fully focus on Medexa with your bodyguard units might have been the call, rather than trying to go for a little bit more of an even spread here. I think that's the sort of situation that Imladris will benefit more from than Lothlorien. It just depends on cavalry perhaps, who are now taking the long way around to maybe put some pressure on that Imladris army, but yeah, Medexa's army will be dealt with ultimately, going the same way as Ding's Lindon force. Archer's defeat seems certain. Mirkwood surviving cavalry, and it is Elder Pathfinders, probably the single most dangerous unit of cavalry just because of the charge damage they're able to lay down, but the fact that Imladris do still have some pikes. It is this cavalry as well, which could still prove to be the fly in the ointment for what was a pretty strong Imladris force, but they're starting to take some chip damage now. Saving grace might be the fact they've got so many spears and polearms, so this cavalry might not be as devastating as they could have been, but the flip side of that is that'll make the Lothlorien axemen and Galathrim nobles in melee a little bit more effective. His general falls in close proximity to the ballistae. Mighty Myrdain, still 15 of them. Armor piercing, still there. Elder Royal Council offering a little bit of support. They're going to be able to distract at the very least over 100 of the ballista crew, which at this point numbers are going to be important regardless of their source. And those Pathfinders still could be, yeah, because of the cavalry I'm now leaning more in favour of a Sylvan Elf victory than a High Elven one, and not too long ago I think the situation would have suggested otherwise. With Galathrim Axemen fighting hard, that damage that Lothlorien is still able to do, combined with the slight numbers advantage I think they had going into this late game engagement as well, proving to be a real difference maker, really. Damage still being done. Kindred, 47 of them. God Helim will still take some killing, but up here, Norituno warriors doing the same thing really that those Elder Royal Council were doing. Trying to plug away at the Pathfinders, who are pretty vulnerable to projectiles, especially when their hit points are gone. It's ballista crew against ballista crew, the duller pastel tones of the High Elves going up against the greens of the Sylvan Elves. Yeah, Norituno warriors being seen and immediately targeted. So who's going to be victorious? It is going to be just about an Imladris victory over here, with some decent strength left to them as well. Mighty Myrdain, 10 of them. I mean, these units at this point really do add up in terms of effectiveness. 31 God Helim, Elder Endway spears as well. The longer Medexa can stay alive, the better it will be. Torres's Elder Pathfinders are still active as well, charging in. Yeah, the High Elves, and the Cavalry just not having the survivability, I guess. The Elder Pathfinders has the damage, but not the ability to stay alive through these many cycle charges that are required. So they are victorious. And now they move across. The last thing they need is for this final engagement to take place, where they're having to fight uphill. Still the Galathrun Riders proving to be significantly more hardy than the Elder Pathfinders, but they don't have the sting off the charge that the Elk Riders do. Spearman. Council firing at point blank as well, just trying to plug away at the strength that Imladris still have up here. And any kills they can get before the rest of the Lothlorien infantry arrives is going to be vital here, really. Continuing cycle charges and just the occasional arrow. Yeah, I think ultimately there's not enough left in the High Elven tank to be able to see them across the line here, unfortunately for them. Again, there's a lot of twists and turns in a battle such as this. Very nature, it can be a difficult thing to gauge. Galathrun Riders still charging in. I mean, it is still spears ultimately. The pikes got dealt with by something somewhere along the line. 1% is the difference, but again, elves versus elves, it was always going to go this way, really, short of a total collapse by one of the armies. But even the player who probably had the hardest time of it was probably Winged Swordsman, and even he didn't go down without doing a decent amount of damage in return. Still losing the fight, of course, but not without reprisal. And the rest of the Galathrun now arriving. The 46 Kindred of Caliborn are the ringers, really. They're not going to be able to deal with those, and there's still cavalry charging in. The Ballista crew has done surprisingly well, given the level of opposition they were faced with. Galathrun. And spears also wading through, and that's going to be that. So yeah, the sum total of the Sylvan Elves who stand victorious are here, probably around 100, still standing. 2% the difference now, just about. And there we have it. The Sylvan Elves overcome the High Elves. I think there were a number of reasons for that as well. I think overall, we mentioned at the start of the battle how important the artillery could be. I think the Sylvan Elves got the better of their ballistas in comparison to what we saw of the High Elves. I think the cavalry as well, we mentioned how the varied cavalry of the High Elves could be more useful, particularly the heavier duty like Horse Lords of Ulmo and the Gwythi Rockdor, but in the end I think the Sylvan Elf cavalry was also more impactful. There were varying fates as well. I mean, the Lothlorien force over there fell to the Imladris force of the Womb Raider here in the middle. Lindon did occupy the high ground initially, but they weren't able to then deal with the attack that then came from Mirkwood, I think. Overall, I think initially it went quite well with the javelins and the archers, but they weren't able to deal with the combination, really, of the Entwives in particular. But when they were backed up by the Hiri Lung, the main way that Lindon could have responded to that would have been with their own shock infantry. But the Hiri Lung made that a more even fight than it could have been, and yeah, I think the Ents did the business, and the Lindon artillery up here didn't really have enough time to do the damage to be able to reverse that. Soccer Enjoyer, I think, had a pretty decent run of it against Ding. Ding's initial forces, ultimately, the cavalry struggled with. And then, you know, I think the main problem for Lindon down here was the fact they got caught in exactly the kind of engagement they don't want, which is being peppered up by archers, and the ballista also adding on top of that. The attack did eventually come, but maybe a little bit too late. Already too much damage had maybe been done for that to be effective, which is why Soccer Enjoyer was ultimately the match winner for his team, albeit with the support of the remaining Elder Pathfinders from the 2 Mirkwood forces. And over here, Medexa did ultimately overcome the Mirkwood defensive forces, but again, not without really significant damage at the hands of the Palace Guard and the Ents as well. The Ents were a really important unit. It's the sort of thing which the other Elven factions simply don't have access to, but Mirkwood do. And yeah, I thought also Mirkwood Silencers were sneakily quite an important unit over here as well with their throwing knives. So ultimately, again, while the 2 Imladris armies were victorious on the flanks, it was with significant damage from Medexa especially. The Womb Raider not only had to deal with the Winged Swordsman, but also deal with the remnants of Chuckles' victorious Mirkwood force, which admittedly was not as healthy as his, but still the extra damage that was then dealt there was enough for ultimately Soccer Enjoyer and those Mirkwood Outriders to be able to do the damage. And I think that's it really. That's really the long and the short of it in this fight. That was the tale of the tapes. Let's see what did the damage for Imladris at least. Yeah, the God Halim were really good, I think, against Lothlorien in that initial engagement. The Norotino Warriors as well. So the Imladris Archers actually did quite well against Lothlorien, but again, I think a good amount of that was early positioning advantage was actually held by the High Elves. They just weren't able to keep it in certain situations. Elder Runway Swordmasters, one of them doing very, very well. I mean, high kill counts are, of course, doubly impressive here, considering the level of quality that they were going up against. Anything with over 100 really is doing very, very well, even the Ballista. Medexa's force, more aggressively used in a shorter space of time. Again, the Elder Runway Archers. The Elder Runway Swordmasters, again, had a bit of a tougher time of it, considering they were, being targeted by Mirkwood Silencers, as well as having to deal with Ents in melee. Elder Runway Archers doing a decent enough job. Spears of Rivendell. Again, Swords of Rivendell maybe struggling a little bit more with the Gwythian Myrdain in there as well. But again, I think that's the key. I think the flanks were dealt with pretty well, but it's all about small victories in this sort of situation, especially when both sides are playing quite well. It can be about those small gains, and ultimately the snowball started to roll a little bit for that Lothlorien army of Soccer Enjoyers, and then the support from Mirkwood. So that was really the difference maker here, but a good competitive fight and more of a pitch battle really, although I don't really know what to refer to this one as. It's not really a pitch as such, because it's within a settlement, but it's not really a siege either, so I'll have to think of some descriptor. The only pitch really was between Lothlorien and Lindon in the more open field down there. But yeah, we'll think of something, I'm sure. So yeah, big thank you to the Womb Raider and Medexa once again for being a provider of quite a few maps at this point. I mean, it's not custom scenarios, it is custom maps, so that means there is the element of players having to pick their army compositions as well, which is a whole nother thing that can involve a little bit of forethought. But yeah, it's been good to see a fair few of these over the course of the past few weeks, and this is only the latest. I'm sure a few more will arrive in the future as well. Still a few scenarios, including actually a sort of narrative scenario series, which I think Colonel Speaks is continuing to work on, involving the Arnorians, and there's also a Battle of the Five Armies scenario being developed by Flame of Arnor, so plenty of brand new content upcoming. And there is, of course, the matter of the backlog, which I am going to be continuing to try and clear. But yeah, we'll do our best with that, but it is what it is from that perspective. So yeah, big thank you to all the players once again. Hope you enjoyed this, and hope you'll join me for whatever is next.